Right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. And thank you very much for joining us today. Welcome to this TechNet 21 webinar series. It's the first one on Introduction to the National Immunization Strategy, NIS. First of all, I would like to note that interpretation in Mongolian has been organized by colleagues from Mongolia. To access the interpretation, please click on the interpretation icon you can see at the bottom of your screen in the form of a globe and then select Russian. I apologize for using the wrong language. The Mongolian is not many languages are not supported by Zoom, and Mongolian is one of them that is not supported. So we have Russian as the language that you will use for the channel in Mongolian. During the presentation, please ask your questions in the Q&A box or in the chat box. They will be answered by the panelists after the presentation. If you have any technical issue, please use the chat box. It's easier. I can discuss with you, I can connect with you, and I help you. I'll try to assist you as much as possible. As usual, this session is recorded, and we'll share the links to the video as well as the slides by email and on the TechNet 21 website. I will send the links to the materials by email to everyone. Everybody is going to introduce themselves, but before I'm going to give Johanna the floor. Johanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Alex, and thank you everyone for joining this webinar on introducing really the national immunization strategy. The new guidance was released in August, and we're really taking the opportunity to engage in these discussions with all of you. Very pleased to see many countries and many colleagues from different organizations and different countries joining this discussion. This session is really to help familiarize you with the guidance, and we're open to any questions. So please do add them in the Q&A, and we really look forward to the discussion. As Alex mentioned, there is a Mongolian translation today. I see a number of colleagues from Francophone countries introducing themselves in the chat. So I want to specify that we will replicate this session next Thursday in French. So if there are any other colleagues that would require or would prefer to have a further discussion in French, please join next week as well. So again, thank you all for joining. My name is Johanna Fihman. I'm the technical officer and the focal point at WHO headquarters for the NIS, and I'm part of the Immunization Vaccine Biologics department. I will have some colleagues joining as well as speakers today, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves. Nathalie?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nathalie Vande. I work with Johanna Fihman, supporting the NIS work. And my area of expertise is health system financing and financing for immunization. And I'm very happy to be with you and looking forward to engaging with you and discussing on NIS. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathalie. We have Amos, Petu.
Thank you very much, Johanna. Good morning, colleagues. My name is Amos Petu. I work within the immunization team at the Intercountry Support Group in East and Southern Africa, based in Harare, Zimbabwe. But I speak to you currently from Asmara, Eritrea, to support the NIS rollout in Eritrea. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Amos, for joining from Eritrea. And our colleague from UNICEF, Eric.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon to everyone. For the one who don't know me, I'm kind of old dinosaur of immunizations, working, let's say, currently as a freelance for UNICEF HQ, mainly on immunizations, planning and budgeting optimization, and for sure on the COVID. In the last 3 years, we have been doing a lot of work on the national immunizations guidelines, also supporting, let's say, WHO and let's say UNICEF on that. But on my side, I will today mainly support also on the NIS.cost, let's say the part of the costing. For your informations, I did already support two NIS this year, Papua New Guinea and Cambodia. So I can also further bring experience later on. Thank you very much, Johanna.
Thank you so much, Eric, and really pleased to have colleagues on the line. And you'll see that the NIS is really you know, a project that was developed with partners and with regional colleagues and country colleagues as well, to really make these guidances practical and useful as possible for you. And thank you all for including your names in the chat. It is really great to see all of those countries represented. So let's go to the next slide. Today's discussion, as I mentioned, is really an introduction to the national immunization strategy. Where does it fit in the context of IA 2030? And of course, in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, clarifying when countries should develop their NIS. We'll go through the high level, you know, the chapters of the NIS guidance so that you know what is available to you, what can be found on the different websites. And then we'll talk as well about the NIS in the context of the COVID-19 vaccine introduction and setting of COVID-19 vaccination targets. Once we've given this overview, I'll give the floor to Amos in Eritrea, who will be able to also bring some perspective and experiences from his work already with some countries in the African region, as well as other colleagues that may be on the line from the regional office to bring their perspectives on these early experiences. So, and after that, of course, we'll go to a Q&A session. I hope we'll have a good 25 minutes to answer your questions. So next slide. First, to bring really the national immunization strategy in the context of the Immunization Agenda 2030. As you all know, this global strategy was endorsed by the World Health Assembly last year, and it's really taking a step further from the previous global strategy, the Global Vaccine Action Plan, by defining really three main objectives. One is related to the zero-dose agenda and reducing by 50% the number of children receiving zero vaccine doses. And this is really the equity and equitable access objective of the IA 2030. The second objective is around new vaccine introduction with an objective of 500 introductions of new and underutilized vaccine in low and middle income countries. And then the objective of 90% coverage for essential childhood vaccines. So this strategy really sets the goals for the new decade, and of course this will require a real engagement from countries to be able to meet these global targets. So next slide. I think before we go into the details of the NIS guidance, we really want to present this new guidance to you as a tool to support more strategic planning. And the first question is, of course, why is this strategic planning important? And we know that, you know, immunization programs, the number of vaccines, the number of intervention has grown tremendously in the past decades. And of course, we're seeing now that the COVID-19 pandemic has even further increased the pressure on countries. The World Bank released a number of reports this year, and we see that, you know, the economic forecasts are worsening since the start of the pandemic. And there is also an understanding that low and middle income countries will take longer to raise general government revenue to pre-pandemic level. And in this context, the prioritization of resources is essential, and therefore really highlights the importance of strategic planning. Yet, of course, it is challenging. Engaging nowadays in longer term planning is difficult and is at risk because of the emergency response to the pandemic. And of course, the COVID-19 vaccine introduction is really putting additional strains on the health system, and is making this, approach to more longer term planning very difficult. And we really want to present this new guidance and engaging into the national immunization strategy development as an opportunity to move towards more strategic planning, yet of course acknowledging the challenges that are currently faced. So next slide. I want to really bring why did we move from a national immunization strategy and moved away from the CMYP, the country multi-year plan that was in place since 2005. And I think there are, 5 key principles here. The first one, as I mentioned earlier, is really to support countries in moving from the GVAP targets towards the new global strategy IA 2030, incorporating the priorities around equity and the zero dose agenda, and of course aligning as well with the regional frameworks as well as Gavi 5.0. For the Gavi eligible countries, the NIS guidance was developed in collaboration with our Gavi colleagues and is fully aligned with the objectives as well of the Gavi 5.0 strategy. The second principle is really that the NIS is meant to be a directional document based on national dialogue, and that is really going towards more ownership at country level and minimizes the need for external technical support. The third point is this, and very much linked to the previous one, is that we're really designing this approach towards a more streamlined, high-level strategic documents that include a streamlined costing approach to support the budget dialogue, and we'll come back to this in a second. But I think this idea of a large document that includes everything, we've moved away from this to really try and focus towards a more high-level strategic document that can be used as a reference and that can be really serve the programmatic discussions. It's meant to be more integrated into the national health sector planning and adapted to the processes. We've put an emphasis in the guidance on the consultation and the stakeholders mapping to ensure that the NIS is, or to facilitate the integration of the NIS discussion within the full health sector. And then finally, the NIS is meant to be realistic. And again, we'll go talk about the costing approach in more details in a minute, but it's really about a negotiation process and defining, key strategic priorities that can be funded based on the resource envelope. And so, whilst in the past there used to be a tendency to, really develop the costing after the priorities were defined, and therefore leaving a gap, we're really through the NIS, encouraging the negotiation process and adapting the priorities so that the strategy is realistic and is based on resources that can be implemented. Next slide. So the first question is, of course, when should countries plan an NIS? And, 3 points here. The NIS should really be triggered first if you've reached the end of the period covered by your previous plan, your CMYP. Then, of course, you would need to to go into developing a new strategy. I think the important point here is that the NIS is not, compulsory. It's not a requirement. If countries choose to update their CMYP, there is no, counterindication against this. We encouraged, using the NIS. However, countries can also update their CMYP should they choose to do so. The second element that should really trigger the development of an NIS is a major change that requires to review and update your priorities and the resources. So it can be an increase in available resources, new funding, new priorities, but it can also be, of course, a shock to the system that requires to review how the program is functioning and what should be the priorities. And of course, nowadays the COVID-19 pandemic is the example of such a shock. The third point is, of course, the possible need to align with funding requests. In the past, the CMYP was a requirement for application to Gavi support for those countries that are eligible for Gavi support. At this stage, considering the situation, Gavi colleagues clarified that the NIS is not a formal requirement. However, countries are strongly encouraged to develop such NIS as it facilitates as well the alignment with the Gavi processes. I won't go into more details on this, but as you will discuss at the end of the webinar, we'll be able to define a series of topics for future webinars, and would be pleased to engage as well with our Gavi colleagues to do a joint session. So moving on, presenting to you really the overview of what is available. The NIS guidance have been published on the WHO website. The link is on this page. They're available in English, in French, and in Russian. You have a first document, which is really a step-by-step guide, very focused, describing the different steps. And it's accompanied with a frequently asked questions where we've put a number of clarification, definitions of key concepts and terms that can also be useful for countries. We have a set of annexes that I'll describe in a second that are really meant to simplify the process at country level. And then we have the NIS costing approach and the link to the application that our UNICEF colleagues have developed and that I'll describe in a second, as well as the link to the annual operational planning guidelines. Next slide. So the guidelines describe this 7-step process that build the NIS, starting from the preparation, developing the situation analysis, the strategy development, monitoring and evaluation framework, resource estimates and budget dialogue, and finally the approval and endorsement. I would like to really highlight the preparation phase, which is so important in facilitating really how the NIS will be developed. And as I mentioned earlier, some of the initial stakeholders mapping and really ensuring that the relevant resources and human resources and relevant expertise are involved in developing the NIS. So if we go to the next slide, this is really to give you an overview and an idea of the target timeline. Of course, it may take a little longer. Maybe it can be done faster, but really the guidelines kind of designs this process to take place over a period of 6 months. Starting, as I mentioned, with the preparation, building on the situation analysis, and really highlighting here that this strategy development really goes hand by hand, is a really iterative process with the development of the monitoring and evaluation framework, but also, and most importantly, the resource estimates and the budget dialogue. So really feeding into each other, so that, again, as I mentioned, we arrive at a strategy that defines priorities that can be funded based on the resources that are validated, and means that the plans can be implemented. For each step in the guidance, you will find a very clear step-by-step approach. What is the process for completing the steps, and including the possible roles and responsibility, how the steps contributes to the development of the content, and you will have as well for each of these steps a recommended set of tools and resources. For example, for the situation analysis, we've included the reference to the guidance that was published by WHO a few months ago, as well as some reference to key resources that can be leveraged for the development of your NIS, and some best practice tips gathered from country experiences, and that we will continue to collect over time. This would include, for example, gender considerations and questions that countries can take into account whilst developing their strategy. So next slide. To really provide an overview of the annexes that I mentioned, the slides will be shared, so I will let you look into this, but really aiming to simplify the process for countries here, and welcoming any additional needs should you have any. You can reach out through your country regional office or directly to us to request additional tools. Next steps. Again, as mentioned earlier, our UNICEF colleagues have done a fantastic work in developing this NIS.cost, which is available online, and it really aims to support the budget negotiation process. Because it's Thanksgiving today, the New York team wasn't really able to join this webinar, and it's really early for them, but we have Eric on the call who can answer questions on the NIS.cost. A demo is available online, and it's really been designed to support the NIS approach, as I mentioned earlier, of engaging in a dialogue whilst developing the strategy, rather than a costing approach that would be done at the end, to really be able to engage into a dialogue. The service desk function allows access to support in real time. A team is in place. What we would like is to organize a specific technical discussion on NIS.cost in the new year. So we will come back to you and be able to provide additional, more specific information. Next slide. This is my final slide. And I think it's we can't really talk about immunization strategies and plans without talking about COVID-19 vaccination. As I mentioned earlier, what should trigger the development of an NIS is any shock to the system that requires to review and assess priorities and strategies in country. And COVID is, of course, one of these shocks, and should theoretically lead to opening the country's immunization strategy and review of priorities. You may have seen that WHO recently published a global COVID-19 vaccination strategy, urging all countries to establish updated national COVID-19 vaccination targets and plans. The strategy is available on the WHO website, and the link is included in this slide. We are really working on a guidance document that will be published shortly on the same website, and that will encourage our and provide support to countries to define those national COVID targets. COVID is a shock because of the new health challenge that it represents, but also it provides new perspective and new potential funding resources. And changes for sure with, as I mentioned, less government revenues and probably additional donor funding. So ideally, countries would, review these strategic priorities for their immunization programs, and as part of this, defined their COVID-19 vaccination targets, using a multi-stakeholder approach, and really integrated into the health strategy. Of course, this is the ideal scenario. We do acknowledge, of course, that countries and regions are overwhelmed in responding to the pandemic, in introducing these vaccines. And therefore, there is limited time and bandwidth to really engage into this overall strategic planning. We do want to really, set the NIS into the context of the global COVID-19 vaccination and the need for countries to set these targets. Countries will be asked to report on those targets in the coming weeks, and I just wanted to make sure that these targets also feed into the NIS for countries that are currently working on the development of these plans. It's a very fluid environment, of course. The objective of the NIS is really to support countries in defining, longer-term priorities, and define, adequate resources available to support the implementation of these plans. And of course, including COVID-19 vaccination targets and the related resources required, and discussing the trade-offs and the prioritization that will be linked to these targets will be important as we move forward. So I have finished with the slides that I wanted to present. I will now give the floor to Amos to provide some perspective and from the work that he's been doing this week in Asmara and in the past few months, and to really provide perspectives from the regional office. So Amos, over to you.
Thank you very much, Johanna, and once again, colleagues, good morning. For the NIS guidance document, Tanzania is a pilot country for us in the sub-region, and they have been able to implement the guidance document to produce the NIS. Currently, we have 3 other countries, Eritrea, Uganda, and Zimbabwe, that are active in the process of developing the NIS. We have taken a decision at the regional working group level to encourage all countries that have their NIS coming to an end to consider the use of the NIS based on the fact that it offers new concepts in the development of a strategic plan. We are looking at the NIS process, and the experience we have so far indicates that, as with all planning, this is a process whereby the document you get at the end of the day will be as important as the discussion that goes into the document. We have a process whereby the governance systems for the program, looking at the ICC, the NITADs, are quite important parts of the development of the NIS. We are learning that the use of the workshop format for consultation is quite useful. And that it better helps in sharpening the objectives. On the whole, since this is still an evolving process, we believe we will be able to get better experience as we go forward. I now pass over to my colleague, Messeret, to add some comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amos. Really appreciate your feedback. Alex, I believe you can unmute Messeret.
You can also, I don't know
And I
if I
can use Amos's.
Ah, you're together. Okay, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. As we learn from Tanzania, it's helping us to really improve on the engagement, on the processes. So Eritrea took it different. So because Tanzania was a pilot, but now I think we have moved on. So what we are learning from the Eritrea is the engagement was good. Preparation was really up to date. They have the comprehensive program review. They have a recent coverage survey. They have service assessments, which are really required to build up the dialogue. So we have most of the information, which came in very handy. The other thing is the stakeholder engagement, especially from the lower level, the involvement, who know the program area at the operational level also are included, which adds value really to the Eritrean NIS development. I know Amos will come with the specifics. However, so far we may not have the same period for the NIS development as recommended for some of the countries who have already prepared all the required background documents. That's what we have observed. Maybe I will come in later. Thank you. Over.
Just before we conclude from experiences from APRO, for me to say that we found that it may be important to have, as indicated in the NIS guidance document, the content producer, someone who can hold the pen and make sure that all the bits and pieces in discussions find their way into the final document. Finally, I think it is important to mention that all these 7 phases of the NIS development process is quite important. They will need adequate planning and follow-up. This is our experience so far. Thank you so much.
Nathalie, can I hand over to you? Thank you so much to Amos and Messeret for their perspectives.
Yes, thank you again to the 3 of you. I believe we have about 25 minutes left, so I wanted to speak as little as possible and give the floor and answer some of the questions that were in the chat as well. So the way I thought we could structure the discussion was going back to the why, when, what, and the how. Johanna explained very well why the NIS came about to address previous shortfalls of the CMYP and also to align it to the IA 2030. When is basically when we have when we're ending a strategy or when there's a need for a revision, and what are the 7-step process. We didn't go in details into the how, and I think a lot of the questions I read are about the how. So if you allow me to start maybe with the why, since going chronologically with Johanna's presentation, there is one question on the why, which is how is NIS aligned with IA 2030? And is it helping to meet the IA 2030 goals? So maybe this is something to be repeated here, Johanna, and I'll see if there are other related questions in the chat. So please put your questions in the chats and I can help present them to the presenters. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nathalie. And yes, so again, the objective of the NIS is really to enable countries to define priorities in the context of IA 2030 and the regional frameworks. So in the guidance, we've really aligned with the IA 2030 objectives and the strategic priorities that are identified in IA 2030. So the guidance is really aimed to walk you through the different priorities to be considered and very much linked to the IA 2030 overall objectives. So it is linked and it's meant to enable countries to define priorities that will allow countries to meet the objectives and the targets that are defined by the regional frameworks and feeding into the global IA 2030 strategy.
Thank you, Johanna. There's another question on the IA 2030, but I think that's more on the how. Do countries have very strong system of optimal coverage needed in NIS? Another question as to why do we want to do an NIS? A new question is, for countries that have a strong system and have good coverage already, do they need to develop an NIS? So I think that falls back onto the compulsory. Do we need to? Is it compulsory to have an NIS?
So, and I've seen as well in the chat around the difference again between the CMYP and the NIS. So maybe again to recap that the CMYP was aligned with the former global strategy GVAP and doesn't necessarily integrate all of the priorities that are part of the IA 2030 strategy. The second thing is the costing and the budgeting approach for the CMYP, which was really done separately from the strategy development as part of the CMYP. So the objective of the NIS is again to move towards more strategic planning. So building on your existing program, what are the additional activities? What are the priorities that countries can define to really bring about change and to be able to meet their objectives? These are really the value that the NIS can bring compared to the CMYP in really trying to support countries in identifying these additional priorities and the related budget and resources that can be found to implement these priorities. And I see that Eric has his hand up. So maybe Eric, you want to complement on this?
Yeah, if you don't mind, Johanna. And
please.
Yeah, and Nathalie, I think there's 3 areas which are fundamentally different with the CMYP, and the experience that I had to support PNG in Cambodia in the last 1.5 years shows that, although it was not perfect. First is the engagement of the stakeholder. In the CMYP in the past, beyond the immunizations program, we and a few people inside the Ministry of Health. We didn't really involve stakeholder. For PNG and for Cambodia, and let's answer right now, we involve more than 50 people from all the directorate inside the Ministry of Health, but we went also to the Treasury and also basically to different ministry, and also major stakeholders today like the World Bank, ADB for Asia and all that. So it's a fundamental difference, and it takes much longer to prepare that. For that, we had a stakeholder engagement plan. We can share some examples. Second point is really the issue of the situation analysis. I don't think we can limit the situation analysis to coverage, even to the EPI review. PNG and Cambodia, we collected, to be frank with you, more than 100 key documents for the last 5 years. We spent easily 2 or 3 months, let's say, reviewing desk review, workshop in working on that, and the consolidation. So it's a fundamental difference with the CMYP, where in the past it was much more restricted. The third one is the Provincial Lab. Many countries are going now for decentralizations or devolutions. And I think it's really a major difference that we have to think with the NIS, is that part of the strategy is also to be considered at the subnational level. In PNG and Cambodia, we had workshop with the subnational level. I think it's very important. And the last one, maybe, there's still more than that we can say with the NIS.
Yeah, we have 15 minutes, so we want to make sure we address all questions. Thank you.
Yeah, just Nathalie, the COVID strategy. To me, today, the NIS should include also the COVID strategy and not 2 different things. That will be a mistake. Cambodia, we try to integrate it. That will be a mistake if we have 2 separate documents in terms of immunization. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Eric. And apologies for cutting short. I want to make sure we are able to answer all the questions. I haven't, I think on the why the NIS, and is it compulsory, and why do we want to have an NIS? And you answered, thank you, Eric, for bringing in this, the importance of integrating with COVID-19 in as much as possible. I think we've gone for medical and finance, and I was also thinking of, yes, what is the suggested duration for an NIS? I think that hasn't been answered yet. With regard to, I think it links to the why for me, the duration. And also with regard to, do we have to have an NIS? Some countries have already integrated the NIS into the maternal and child health strategy plan. So I think it goes back to the ownership that NIS should be owned before all, and it needs to be adapted to the circumstances of the country. So with regard to the duration, Johanna, you want to answer this one?
Sure, thank you. So the time frame that the NIS is meant to cover is the same as the CMYP, is about 5 years. However, as was flagged in one of the questions, the NIS is really meant to be a living document, and as I mentioned in the slides, I think it's meant to be a streamlined strategic document, not an exercise that you do every 5 years and then would sit on the shelves and would not be used. This means that the NIS is meant to identify, when you set it up based on your program reviews, what would be the priorities for the next 5 years. But any change or any adjustment wouldn't lead to reviewing the priorities and being able to really use the NIS as a living document, so that it can effectively provide a course of action and really be used in defining your annual plans and adapting as the context evolves. So really, depending on each country context, the opportunity to develop this NIS for 5 years and to be able to use it as a living document and to update it as required.
Thank you, Johanna. And I saw a question on whether the CMYP integrates the NIS. So I see Sarah is helping answer this question in writing. There may also be circumstances, as you stressed, Johanna, that it's country specific, where the health system strategy, and we're going slowly into the how, where the health system strategy, for example, may be planned for 3 years down the road, and in which case a program may choose to do an NIS for, let's say, more 3 years or 3 to 5 years, so that there's an opportunity to then align with the HSSP, for example. But Johanna, you helped flow to the what question. There were no questions on when, so I think that's very clear as to when do we do an NIS. There was a question on the what, and it's the living document and the NIS. I believe, Johanna, you helped answer that question, that it really is meant to be a supportive document with directions, with several priority level, and not something to be developed on an ad hoc basis in a way to support an application, for example. So now on the how, and then I hope that others will help support Johanna, others, I mean Amos and Messeret, on the how, because you may also have, and Eric, of course, supplementary and examples that you want to share. So on the how, there were 4 questions, 5 actually, sorry. One is, how do we ensure an ownership? How do we update the NIS when suddenly new money is available? I think we started answering that one. How do we update the NIS to align with the health sector strategy? And how do we manage donors, when they are not aligned with the plan and they come in the middle of an annual operation plan? And finally, the last question is, how do we raise more money? Because if we want to reduce 50% or the 0 dose by 50% in a 3-year period, and maintain our program, it will require more resources. So I see there are 2 questions on resources, which maybe we can leave for the subsequent. First one is maybe, how do we ensure ownership, and how do we update the NIS to align with the new HSSP? Maybe these 2 questions can be answered together. And I don't know, Johanna, if you want to start or if you want me to give the floor to someone else.
Thanks, Nathalie. Maybe just before, I see a question in the chat as well, related to the grant and finance opportunities and the presence of an NIS. And I think Amos, you wanted to answer this question. So maybe giving you the floor first.
Yes, just to say that the NIS provides that opportunity to pull together all the actions that will make a change in immunization, and at the same time be able to put costs that will indicate the investment requirements. And that is why most of the funders would like to see a document like the NIS that is aspirational, but at the same time a little realistic, looking at what already exists in funding and looking at the gaps that might occur in terms of reaching objectives, so that they can be able to put their resources to support the program. So for me, I think it is crucial for us to continue to see the NIS as a document that can enable us bring together the investment requirements to make a change in the immunization program. Thank you.
Thank you, Amos. And I think while we're on the money part, the various questions were, how do we need to update the NIS if we suddenly have more money? How do we manage donors that come in the middle of a strategy or an operational plan? How do we help manage this? And how do we raise more funds? And I think you started addressing the raising more funds for the NIS, especially as we have an ambitious plan to make progress towards IA 2030. But Amos, do you want to continue answer on the financial questions about how do we make sure we have the money, or we are ready if there's more money, which I don't necessarily think that this is immediately going to happen in the next coming 2 years, considering the situation. But how do we have an NIS that will support us if there are suddenly more resources? And how do we manage the donors? How do we leverage the NIS to manage donors in aligning? And how do we make donors align more with our plan in the short term, but also in the longer term? And how do we leverage the negotiation for the NIS to help frame donors a bit more, as much as possible? And in terms of mobilizing more resources, I think that's a tough question. So I don't know, Amos, if you want to further answer.
Just for me to give a short response, then others can come in. That one way by which we can get stakeholders and funders to be on board is to ensure that we have a robust process that brings all stakeholders, prospective funders inclusive, on the table while the process of developing the NIS is going on. And again, after we do the costing, to have a robust dialogue with government, helpful if the Ministry of Finance can lead that process because they have a broad perspective of the fund landscape in the country, including what donors and partners will bring to the table. So that way, make sure that we are able to bring all resources, both current and prospective, to the table. And the dialogue and the process of developing this will reduce, as much as feasible, a situation where partners will come later and be worrying in terms of where to put their resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Amos. And maybe from your experience in Tanzania or Eric's experience in PNG or Cambodia, this dialogue and this negotiation with donors, do you have any lessons learned that you want to share with the group?
Yeah, but we cannot share in 1 minute. I think I may share with the group. I mean, different.
We'll have a session just for that.
No, sure. But I can share also with the group the experience we had in PNG and Cambodia, because we spent almost 1.5 years on these two countries. So it's good. It's important also to consider that there was also two piloting. So we may share later on. Thank you.
Okay, so no lessons learned from the negotiation part with regard to funding?
Yes, plenty of lessons learned. But do you want a separate session or do you want now?
Of course, we'll have a separate session so that we can go into more details. But if you already want to give us one or two important
I think this is what I say. The importance of discussions ahead of coming into, let's say, supporting the country, within the country, to organize the stakeholders, the discussions, and for sure what we call the budget dialogue, which for PNG and Cambodia was difficult, mainly for two reasons. One is because we have not been working, let's say, enough ahead of the, let's say, the development of the NIS, especially with financial number. Cambodia is difficult because it's not so transparent. But then it's also what we were discussing together, the time frame that we need. And that's also the second lesson learned. We have really to make sure that we are tuning that in order to get, at the time you develop the strategy already, a pre-costing, and the NIS.cost is very useful for that, and then to plan the budget. The lesson learned this year is that the COVID was also taking so much time of the people that it was a bit difficult, but I hope for the future it will be good. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, for that. And yes, I think this budget negotiation and how do we manage to mobilize more resources to be able to reduce, for example, the zero dose by 50%, or how do we organize the NIS to make sure that if there are opportunities, we're able to seize this. I think the NIS and the costing tool are really organized in a way that you prioritize. You have the top priorities, and then you have extra priorities, or less important priorities. And the objective was precisely this, that we discuss together what is it that we would want. We negotiate the budget and we identify what is feasible. So that's the realistic point that Johanna was talking about. But then it doesn't mean that we eliminate the rest. The rest is there and can be taken into account and can already be pre-costed rapidly, so that if at any point our budget increases, we already know and we can integrate and make further progress than planned originally. So that negotiation and the flexibility is indeed very important. On mobilizing resources, I agree, Eric, that requires a whole mobilizing more resources or making resources maybe more efficient. That would require a whole session in itself. But while we're still on money, there's a question on costing. I'm trying to Are there specific questions on costing? I see one, but it's more saying that
Nathalie,
yes.
sorry to interrupt
Tell
you.
me.
I
No,
think we have
help me.
a colleague from Tanzania who raised his hand. William, do you want to come in? You should be allowed to talk now.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I just wanted to contribute on two areas. One, on the dialogue. You know, when we were preparing our national immunization strategy, also Tanzania was developing national health sector strategic strategy number 5. So health, immunization is part of national health sector strategy. Now it became very difficult for only immunization to negotiate with some partners on this, but at least we have those core partners on immunization. They were able to set aside time and participate in Nis discussions. But the other thing I think is about the COVID-19. When we were developing, and since we have given us our documents, you will be able to see that we were really unable to incorporate the COVID-19 vaccination issues. One, they were very complicated. We didn't know where we are going. So maybe as I'm seeing even on the chat, currently the COVID-19 vaccination activities are real pinning down our routine immunization. I wish if these things could have been really together, but you find that the COVID-19 is very powerful in the government agenda. Sometimes we are failing to realize our routine immunization. However, of recent, we have advocated because we have indicated the performance of our routine immunization, which again has been affected by COVID-19. And this will go back to our baseline when we were preparing Nis. We didn't expect it to go down, but now we are seeing we are surging a little bit down, something which we didn't know before when we were preparing our Nis. I think Tanzania, in days to come, we need maybe to have really good discussions with colleagues Afro and HQ to see how our Nis also can look into these new aspects. This is what I just wanted to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you, William. I think we have 1 minute left. Johanna, maybe you just want to close the webinar.
Thank you so much, and thank you to to Amos and Messeret who joined from Asmara, and for William for your very useful perspective. And I think to build on what you said and what was mentioned in the chat on integrating COVID-19 in the NIS or not. Of course, there are so many uncertainties around COVID-19, but as you mentioned, William, I mean, this is really what is being discussed at the moment in countries, and developing a national immunization strategy and priorities without considering COVID-19, the impact of the COVID-19 vaccine on resources, on the program, seems like such a missed opportunity and needs to be taken into account. I think, as policy decisions or recommendations evolve, as we understand more what COVID-19 will look like in the midterm, if not long term, then we will need to adjust how we integrate COVID-19 vaccine into broader planning. But I think this is really to encourage countries to estimate priorities, trade-offs in the context of this COVID-19 vaccination, and having to set targets and to leverage the principles of the NIS when developing those COVID-19 vaccine targets. That will be probably the focus of the discussions for the coming weeks and months with your respective Ministry of Health. So really this was a very informative session, and really appreciated the questions and the engagement. As mentioned on this slide, we really hope to organize follow-ups and additional sessions, please do feel free to reach out to, through our regional or country offices, WHO or UNICEF, or we will add as well on this slide the mailing address for the NIS. Would be happy to answer any follow-up questions and provide additional guidance. We will look to organize additional sessions. Any feedback that you have, please do feel free to put in the chat. Again, we'll organize another session in French next week. We'll organize another session for our US-based and for the PAHO region colleagues later in December. We will continue this dialogue, and we welcome your feedback and your input on additional sessions that would be useful. We're really, hoping to support you as much as possible in transitioning from the CMYP to the NIS, and to enable countries to move towards, a strategic planning in the context of IA 2030 and of the pandemic, of course. So with these words, again, thanking you very much. With 2 minutes over, we'll be following up, and thank you to Eric from UNICEF as well for representing the team, and we look forward to organizing a session to debrief on previous experiences on the NIS. We'll really continue to monitor and to build lessons learned as more and more countries develop their NIS, so that we can really create a platform for countries to share their lessons learned. So thank you very much, and with this we wish you all a very good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And just as a reminder, we'll send you the links to the recording and the slides by email. They will also be made available on the TechNet 21 website. And pour les Français, nous vous voyons la semaine prochaine à la même heure pour une session dans la langue française. Thank you again, and have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.